So I'm
Okay.
Kelsey.
I'm Cam.
We are so excited. You are our first guest ever on the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be your first guest.
We're so excited to have you here because we both know you as an amazing self-advocate,
Yeah,
and we're excited to have more people get to know you.
yeah. My name is Pauline Bosma. I am the founder and the coordinator of the Rainbow Support Group. I've been doing this for 20 years.
So there's a lot going on in the world right now that is not good, but let's start with something that's more positive. You said you were feeling good. What is helping you to feel good right now?
What's helping me feel good is that regardless of what's happening in the political world, I'm going to keep on doing my work. I'm going to keep on advocating for LGBT, IDD, people with disability in general, and everything like that. I'm not going to stop. The biggest thing that I'm proud of right now is that me, Oscar, and Nora, we created an online guide booklet for people to use. And it's the Rainbow Guidebooklet. You go to the rainbowguidebooklet.com and you can find it. It's there. Right now, we're on the verge of just hitting 60,000 people.
Wow.
We have about maybe four colleges across the country using it in their college courses. So,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So I created something that's going to be that long after I'm gone, this thing is still going to be going, and it's like that. People are connecting more and more. About a couple weeks ago, me and Oscar did a training for an organization out in Portland, Oregon, and we had 189 participants online in one day.
Wow.
So that was a huge training. We have about 7, maybe 8 groups in Massachusetts. And then we have groups in, like, we have connections in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Green Mountain State. We have connections in New York. We have connections in Texas, Colorado, California. We have 2 connections up in Canada. We have our next connection in Australia on the other side of the world. And then
Wow.
about a month ago, we made a connection with some people in England. So now we're talking to England about stuff.
So you are booked and busy.
I am booked and busy. I mean, I'm always doing something, but I'm always thinking of the next thing. Like the next big thing that me and Oscar are working on is that last year, we got a grant to talk to teachers that are teaching special ed about LGBT and IDD. So we're going to come up with some ideas that might help them.
We definitely need that, Polly.
Yep.
Schools.
I am trying. Don't worry. I mean, I know that's my biggest pet peeve is the sexual education for people with disability that doesn't really exist. They might learn basic health, how to take care of themselves, how to, like whatever, but they ain't gonna learn no more than that because most people don't think they can understand it. And I got a program that I created that will help people learn about sexuality and gender and everything like that. So, yeah.
So I've seen a lot of videos and stuff where people say they want to transition like at like 6 or 7.
Yep.
How do you help people like that or do they come to you and say like, oh, I like what is being transgender like, or how do you help them with that situation?
I just tell them to be honest and truthful to themselves and everything like that. I mean, most, and you guys can agree with me probably on this, that when you're about 5 or 6 years old, you already know what you are if you're a boy or a girl. There's no, Kelsey knew at the age of 5 years old, I was a girl. Okay, boom, that was it. Kamisha, you knew you were a girl. Okay, boom, now. But there's people out there that are, now, when you're talking about transgender people, right? 99% of the people in the world, in the real world, automatically think it's what's between their legs,
Oh,
their biological sex.
oh,
It is not transgendered. Transgendered is people that have a brain that develop differently than their than what they're born with. So I was born male, but my brain somewhat thinks like a female, and it always did. At the age of 5, I knew there was something wrong, not just having a disability where I can't. If you would ask me to read something, I can't do it. I can't read. I can't write, and I'm not going to try to learn because I just don't understand it. So that's why I have people that dictate it. But I mean, being transgender is your brain and your how your brain adapts and what you learn and everything like that. So and has a lot to do with it. What is between your legs has very little to do with that, you know. And that's one thing that I always tell people is that being transgender is totally different because you're because you can't change the brain. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, so in order to make yourself happy, you got to change the body to align with the brain, and that's what that's what a lot of transgender people do. Yes, are we afraid about what's going to happen? What could happen? Yes, but you got to remember that give or take, that since the beginning of mankind, transgender issues have been around. They were around in the Roman times. They were around in the every era of history has had transgender history or something like that. Like there was I think an emperor or something like that. He wasn't really well known. He only survived about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And this was back in the Roman time. He would wear women's clothing. He would identify as a woman. He got married and he was the bride. But I mean, they didn't know what it was back then because there was no words to describe it. The word
Yeah.
transgender didn't come until before World War II. You know, when a German scientist created the first transgender clinic in Germany. There was a German doctor, and he wanted to help transgender people. And it was there. But I mean, there's been other stories. It's like for us, our biggest for America, our biggest person is Christine Jordan because she was the first American to go overseas, get the operation, and come back.
Oh, okay.
So, but she did it and everything like that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I did not know any of that trans history, so appreciate that. I have
Yeah.
been seeing a lot of signs that say trans people have always existed and will always exist.
It's like LGBT. LGBT has been existing since the beginning of mankind too, but you don't see it. I mean, back in the early 20s and 40s and everything like that, when they had, if you were around and you saw a man with a red rose in his lapel jacket, that means he was gay. But I mean, they didn't know what it was back then. Only the community knew what it meant. So there was
Yeah.
different things that they did to kind of acknowledge each other, but not really do it over.
Yeah. Well, just because we don't have a label for it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Right.
So obviously we know you as a self-advocate and as a gender and sexuality educator. What has been your journey? Like you mentioned kind of knowing when you were a kid that you were a woman, but what's your journey been like as a trans woman?
It's been pretty good. I haven't really had too many negative things happen. I was coming home from my doctor's appointment and everything like that. And, and he saw me come out of my car and go into my apartment and everything like that. I was all dressed up really nice and everything like that. And he called a friend of mine that lived upstairs in the other apartment. And he said, and he he told her what he thought about it and everything like that, that I shouldn't be dressing and stuff like that in front of, at that time, because it was time for school kids to be getting out of school. And she called me up and she asked me about it, and I I said, well, this is what I'll do for him, And she knew I was joking. I said, this is what I'll do. I'll quit Rainbow. I'll quit myself, quit everything that I'm doing. I'll lock my door and lock myself in my apartment for the rest of my life. And she goes, you wouldn't do that? I go, no. And I don't give a rat's ass what he thinks about me, because that's his problem. That's not my problem. If he doesn't like me, he doesn't have to talk to me. It's like my siblings. I got one brother and two sisters. I'm the youngest of five. I lost my two older sisters. My two older sisters passed away, but I got one sister and one brother left. I haven't talked to my siblings in probably about 20, 22 years, because they disowned me because of my lifestyle. So that's not
terrible. That's terrible to hear, Pauline.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's because I got my Rainbow family. I got all the members of Rainbow, all the people that I teach, all the people that are part of Mass, and everybody else that I know. That's my family, and that what makes me feel good. As long as they accept me and they understand me, I'm not going to worry about it, because I can act out and say I don't like it, but right now I'm going like like with the political folly, like can't do nothing until the 2-year, when we have the 2-year term,
the midterms
election, then we can say, okay, let's put some more people in there that's going to protect us and protect the what we're doing. But I mean, until then, I'm going to let them
do what they want to do.
Yeah. Make their mistakes and dig their holes a little bit deeper, and just and then when we have our presidential election, we can say, hey, look what Trump did in his first, look at all the shit he tried to pass. Excuse my language, but I mean, I'm like, look at all the stuff he tried to do, and then it's like he did all that. But
I think that's a great instructive for how, because I was wondering, like, what do we do now? Like, where do we go from here? How do we not get incredibly depressed? How do we not get hopeless? But it sounds like what you're sort of saying is more lean into the things that do make you happy, lean into the communities that you've built. Because then we hear that chosen family, that term, a lot with people who are in the LGBTQ community, because a lot of people maybe don't have the best relationships with their families, but they have found friends, they found other people. So I think that's a really wonderful message for people to hear right now.
Right.
I heard that family doesn't have to be blood, which I totally.
Right. I mean, it doesn't have to be blood.
Yeah.
And then now I'm curious, we talked a little bit, me and Kenesha, last time about how we kind of got into self-advocacy a little bit. I would love to know, how did you actually become a trainer? How did you become a prominent self-advocate? Like, how did you get into this?
Well, my first thing of self-advocacy was when I joined a local group. It was called the Blackstone Valley Self-Advocacy Group. At first, I was just a member, and it went for like 5 years to the group. Every week, or when they had the meeting, I went to the meetings like that. And one year, somebody asked me and said, hey, they're having elections. And I said, elections for what? And they said, for officers. I said, okay. And I said, well, what are the positions? They said, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And I said, well, I'm going to try for the vice president first. I want to work my way up there. So I did my little speech and I won, vice president and everything like that. And I did that for like 3 or 4 years. And then somebody came up to me and said, you should run for president now. I said, okay. So I ran for president. I was of this local group. I was elected president. I think I had about 3 or 4 terms as president, because they just liked the work that I was doing. The last time they had it, I couldn't be there because I had a, a training that I had to do somewhere else's. And, so I put in all my paperwork and with like that. Then I got a phone call the next morning. The person that was the advisor of the group called me up and she said, I don't know how you did it, but you weren't there and you won again. I said, okay.
Won by reputation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So, and then that gave me the chance to, like that I ran on the mass board. I was on the mass board. As high as I got on the mass board was vice chair. I
Okay.
couldn't
Were
make
you
it.
it's all about connecting and knowing yourself and knowing people, I guess, and being able to communicate with people. So that's awesome.
Well,
And
the
how did Rainbow Group come about?
Rainbow Group came about of two different things. I wanted to start a little because at that time, about 20, 22, 23 years ago, me and a friend of mine, we were traveling from Massachusetts down to New Haven, Connecticut, which when you stop and think about it, it's an hour's ride, about an hour or something ride. And I was doing that like once a month for like 2 or 3 years. And I finally, kind of like I was thinking about it one day. I said, I spent an hour going down there. On the way home, I said, I would like to start one. He said, well, we don't get back to office until October 1st. So on October 1st, 2004 is when I went into his office and I wrote down the official date that when it started. So
Wow.
so and it's just been getting bigger and bigger every year, and there's growing.
And how did that evolve into trainings?
Well, that involved in the trainings because I was asked to do a training for. There was a company that I occasionally work for once a year called Elevatus Training, and they called me up and they asked me if I wanted to do a training. So I said, yeah. So that was my first. That was one of my second trainings, but I've done other trainings. Like my first official training was doing a DDS office and talking about LGBT. But I've done human rights office for DDS. I've done diversity committees. I've done, agencies and everything like that. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out, like, and when I do a training, I ask the participants or the people that want to do the training, I say, what do you want to learn? What is it specific? Do you want to learn about LGBT or do you want to learn a little bit more about IDD? Or do you want to learn them both? Or do you want to, like, what's the concept of the training? What do you want an outcome? And then they'll say, well, we want to learn about LGBT, but we also want to be learning about how to support them and a little bit about, disability, but not much. And that's what I do is I design the training individually for each agency. There might
Okay.
be some individual slides that might be the same in each training, but each training is going to have something different that's going to make it stick out.
So in your trainings, you're talking about LGBTQ plus issues as well as IDD.
Mhm.
What's sort of the difference between maybe your training and someone who's just talking about LGBTQ issues?
Well, my training, we have a slide, right? And it's like 3 circles. So the first circle is that barriers for LGBT and IDD people. Then on the first circle, it says, what are some of the barriers for people that are LGBT and don't have a disability, just regular LGBT people? What are some of their barriers? Then on this circle, it said, what are some of the barriers for people that identify as LGBT but have a disability? And then we say, what are some of the barriers that they have together?
Okay. What are some of those barriers?
There's a lot of them.
Well, some of those barriers is sometimes their parent or guardian or somebody in their life will not accept them because you might have a college student that might be going to college and they might say, "Hey, I'm going to come out as gay, or I'm going to come out as trans, or I'm going to come out as this," you know. And then the parent finds out, and they're going to kick the kid out.
Right.
Mhm.
So, and that happens. So it's those barriers that are there, but you don't talk about them. It's like when you go to a regular LGBT group meeting. I said, this is the way it usually is. You have the gays over there, lesbians over there, trans people over there, drag queens, whatever over there. This is the way it is. And that's the way it's been with them. But with my group, I say, hey, come sit at my table. Come sit at my table. Let's talk. And we
I
do.
love that.
I try to bring them together and say, let's talk. Let's not, put down each other.
Right.
Because that's what the regular LGBT community is doing. They're going, well, the gays don't like the lesbians, and lesbians don't like the heterosexual women out there don't like the lesbians, and the gays don't like the trans people. When that it's just a big old mess. So
I love seeing and going to pride parades because everybody comes together. It's not just like one person goes here, one person goes there. When was your first pride parade?
first Pride Parade was probably back in, I'm gonna say, maybe 2006, because I went to Worcester Pride and everything like that. So yeah, yeah.
I've only been to one, and it was by accident. My mom and I went into Boston for the day, and there just happened to be a
A
pride
pride,
parade. And so,
right.
so my mom has now marched in a pride parade because we had to cross the street at a certain point.
I love pride.
On the ladder of LGBT people with disability are on the bottom. We're at the bottom because we're not anywhere near where the
We're not
regular-
seeing.
right,
I
because we're not.
definitely feel like people with intellectual disabilities are often left out of a lot of conversations. That includes what's going on politically, what's in the news, and certainly with gender and sexuality. It's a shame because some people just don't know how to talk about it. And some people feel like if they talk about it, it's going to have an effect. Nobody became gay because somebody mentioned gay people. Nobody became trans because they learned about trans people. They were already that way. And it's
Right.
just about, oh, suddenly you have language now.
And God, Commissioner.
No, nobody can be bisexual. Like
No, and that's fine. So, I mean, and the other problem is that me and Commissioner can probably relate with is that most people think in the real world that if you have a disability,
right.
you're not you first of all you're not capable of having sex because you don't understand what it is.
What is? Yep.
And then some people will say, "Oh my God, I don't want my son catching your disease,
Right.
your disability." It's like
Right.
you can't catch my disability because I was born with my disability. You ain't gonna catch it if I touch you.
Right.
What would your advice be to parents of any kid, not specifically LGBTQ, but just any kid coming up today with IDD? What would you want their parents to know?
Just support your kid, understand you're a kid, and let them lead, because you're going to want to protect them, but you're also going to want them to learn from their mistakes and the real world. You can't hold them up in the house for the rest of their life because they ain't going to learn anything. If you would have seen me when I was a guy, you would have been very surprised because I was very withdrawn, very shy with myself. I wasn't comfortable with myself. So
And going off of that question, Pauline, what would you say to youth who are looking into transitioning or just in general? Like, what would you say to them?
well, I would say make sure that if you want to come out as LGBT plus or anything like that, that either the parent or the guardian or the school or somebody, ask them, why did you ask about the word gay? Because it's a communication. One of my first groups, besides the ones that I started, I went to the group and I had a disability and everything like that. And he's in there, he's asking me, he raised his hand and he said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, you can ask me any question you want. And he goes, what does it mean when I like somebody like me? And I said, you mean another man? He goes, yeah, I mean, that means you're gay. Now, this is back then, this is 20 years ago, so give or take, the agency that was providing him services, right? They would not let, they could not answer that question to him because the Department of Developmental Service, DDS, could have said, you influence him on saying that word gay.
That's crazy.
Yes, that is crazy, but that's the way most agencies think about it. That's why there's, like, if you look at DDS policy, it's in their policy that they say you're allowed to date who you want, regardless. So it doesn't say, LGBT, it just says you're allowed to date and do what you want with your partner. But there's agencies that are not talking about it, and there's agencies that won't talk about it because they don't think their clients or people will understand it.
Right.
I think, that definitely brings up a great point. If you're a self-advocate who's living on your own by yourself, you can make your own choices. But if you're someone who's living in a congregate setting, like in a group home or with other people, you don't have as much agency over who you date. And so I imagine that a lot of providers might have a rule that says you can date whoever you want to date. But I imagine that when the self-advocate actually goes to date somebody of the same gender, then they might run into problems.
I remember when I came out, my mom, she's like, wait, that's not allowed in our culture because it really isn't. And, she was shocked, but she was like, I'm okay with it, but don't tell anybody else. It's okay. From time to time, she still brings it up because her mindset is focused on something else, but it's like on our background, so she can't separate the two, which is interesting, but she's getting there, to say the least.
Right. That's like, this is a really good story. There was a group, and I went to the group one time because they wanted to talk to me about something. So I went down to the group and I said, what's the problem? And they said, we want to go to a gay nightclub. And I said, okay, and what's stopping you from going to the gay nightclub? And the advisor of the group said, well, DDS says that Rainbow is funded by them. I said, wait a minute. Rainbow is not funded for them. I'm funded by them. I was, at one time, I was funded by them. So he said, well, we still have a problem. I said, okay. So I set up a meeting with the old commissioner, even now. I asked her, I said, hey, is a group allowed to go out to a nightclub? She goes, yeah. She goes, well, I have a group that wants to go, but the agency is telling them that DDS will not let them go because it's funded by Rainbow. And she goes, okay. So she sits there and she writes out this nice little letter. And then I copied it, and then I give the original one. I go down there and I said, here you go. And then I gave it to the advisor, and she read it. And she just looked at me and she goes, you gotta be kidding me. I go, nope. I said, I cleared the problem. If the group wants to do that, they're allowed to do it as long as there's safety precautions to put in.
I love that story, Pauline, because I think that it speaks to, first of all, being a self-advocate and going and talking to someone, but also knowing that you can ask people to help you self-advocate. So the people in that group, they couldn't go to the commissioner, but they could go to you, and then you could go to the commissioner. So I think for anyone who's, struggling right now, maybe you can't go to the person who's going to make the change,
Right.
but maybe you can go to someone who can help you get to the person who can make the change.
Right. It's all about the process too.
I'm not much into politics.
Mhm.
I mean, I go out and vote and everything like that. But me and Oscar, we got a chance to maybe go down to DC and go do some legislation down there. And I said, well, is it worth it for me to go down to DC and talk about the issue of LGBT and IDD with some politicians down at the Senate and Congress and everything like that? And I'm thinking about it. I will literally put my neck on the line before. Like I say to people, you don't have to worry about the face of Rainbow or anything like that because I'm the face of Rainbow. So
Wow. So I do want to wrap up. Any last words of wisdom or hope for people right now?
don't worry about what's happening down in DC so much because there's really nothing you can do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you
Okay.
very much, Pauline.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you, Pauline and Kamisha, everybody.